She was 7 years old, the first time she heard a piano. It was coming from the house at the end of the road, the one with the blue gate and the potted plants on the step. The window was open. Someone inside was playing something slow and soft, and it spilled out onto the street like it had nowhere better to be. She was on her way back from school, bag hanging off one shoulder, shoes kicking up dust. She stopped walking. She just stood there on the side of the road, eyes half closed, listening. She did not know what the instrument was called. She did not know anything about notes or keys or how music was made. All she knew was that something inside her chest had shifted the way a door shifts when someone pushes it open for the first time. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard, and it was gone in less than a minute, swallowed back into the house as the window was pulled shut. She stood there for another few seconds. Then she picked up her bag and walked home, but she did not forget it. At home, things were tight in the way they always had been. Not desperate, not dramatic, just quietly difficult in the way that stretches a family thin without breaking it completely. Her mother worked long hours. Her father did his best. There were other children, other needs, other things to worry about. The house was small and full of noise and love in roughly equal measure. Nobody talked about music lessons. Nobody talked about pianos. These were not things that belonged in conversations about what was possible. Still, she asked. She asked her mother one evening, while they were sitting together after dinner. She described the sound she had heard. She said she wanted to learn how to make it. Her mother listened carefully. She did not brush her daughter off or laugh. She took her time before answering, the way she always did when something mattered. "That costs money," her mother said. "Lessons cost money. A piano costs money. We don't have that right now." She nodded. She understood. She was 7, but she had already learned that understanding something and being okay with it were two different things. She said goodnight and went to bed. For a few weeks, the idea sat quietly at the back of her mind. She would hear music sometimes on the radio, from a passing car, from the television in the next room, and she would feel that same pull in her chest. A wanting that had no clear shape. Then, one afternoon at school, everything changed. The teacher brought in a thin book during the last period of the day. It was a music workbook, the kind meant for children just starting out, with pictures of instruments and simple explanations of how they worked. Most of the class barely glanced at it. But she read it cover to cover that afternoon, and there, on one of the pages near the back, was a diagram. It was a picture of a piano keyboard, the full row of black and white keys, each one labeled with a letter. C, D, E, G, A, B. Then back to C again. The page explained how to find middle C, how the notes went up and down, how the pattern of the keys repeated. It was simple, clear, and drawn in black and white. She stared at it for a long time. Then she tore a blank page from the back of her exercise book, borrowed a ruler from the girl next to her, and started to copy it. She drew every key. She measured them as carefully as she could with a ruler. She used a black pen for the marks between the white keys, trying to get the proportions right. The black keys were shorter, she noticed from the diagram. They sat higher. She drew them sitting higher. She labeled every white key with its letter, just like the book showed. When she was done, she held it up and looked at it. It was not perfect. The keys were a little uneven. Some were wider than others. But it was a keyboard. Her keyboard, made from paper and a borrowed ruler and a black pen, but hers. She took it home that evening and showed nobody. She put it on the floor of the room she shared with her younger siblings, waited until they were busy with something else, and sat down in front of it. She placed both hands above the paper. She looked at the labels. She pressed down on the C key with her right index finger. There was, of course, no sound, but her finger pressed down anyway, and he narrated from memory. From that one moment outside the blue gate, something played. This became her routine. Every day after school, when she could find a few quiet minutes, she would sit with her paper keyboard on the floor and practice. She borrowed the music workbook from the school library once she found it on the shelf. Then she borrowed it again. Then she found other books, beginner piano guides, sheet music for children, anything with diagrams and notes and finger positions. She could not take them all home. so she sat in the library during lunch and copied what she needed into her exercise book. She learned where the notes sat. She learned that the thumb was finger number 1 and the pinky was finger number 5. She learned what a scale was. And she practiced running her fingers up and down her paper keys in the order the book said, ober and ober, until the movement felt natural. She practiced both hands separately, the way the books recommended. Then she tried them together, watching her own fingers press silently against the paper. Nobody knew she was doing this. It was not a secret exactly. She was not hiding it, but she also had no words for what it was. She was not a piano student. She did not have a piano. She was just a girl sitting on the floor of a small room, pressing her fingers against a drawing she had made, practicing for something that had not happened yet. Her first keyboard wore out within a few weeks. The paper creased along the fold lines, then tore at the corners, then got a water stain on the lower end from a cup that was set down without care. She made a new one. This time she made it bigger, using 2 sheets of paper taped together at the back. She added more keys. She colored the black keys in more carefully, using a thick marker so they looked solid and real. Then she made a third one, a fourth. Each one was a little better than the last. She learned to space the keys more evenly. She learned to make the black keys the right height relative to the white ones. She got better at the labeling. By the 5th keyboard, someone who did not know what they were looking at might have mistaken it for a printed diagram rather than something hand-drawn by a child. She did not think of herself as doing anything remarkable. She thought of herself as practicing. She had been told that learning an instrument took time and repetition. She had no instrument, but she had time. She had plenty of repetition. She figured that if she practiced the movements and learned the notes and understood the theory, then, when the day came that she could sit at a real piano, she would not be starting from nothing. She intended to be ready. One afternoon, her class teacher walked past the library window and happened to glance in. She saw the girl sitting alone at the end of the furthest table, head bent over a piece of paper, both hands raised slightly above the surface, fingers moving in a slow, deliberate pattern. The teacher stopped. She watched. The girl did not notice her. After a minute, the teacher walked away without saying anything. But the next morning, she stopped the girl before class and asked her quietly what she had been doing in the library. The girl looked at her for a moment. Then she reached into a bag and pulled out the folded paper keyboard. She set it on the desk between them and smoothed out the creases. The teacher looked at it. She looked at the careful labeling, the measured keys, the colored-in black notes, the wear marks at the fold lines from weeks of handling. She looked at the girl. "How long have you been doing this?" "Se, ask it." The girl thought about it. "Since the beginning of term," she said. The teacher picked up the paper keyboard and held it carefully, like it was something that could break. She did not say anything for a long moment. Outside in the corridor, the morning bell rang. Somewhere down the hall, other children were arriving. Doors were opening. The day was beginning. But in that small classroom, the two of them stood very still, a teacher holding a hand-drawn piano, and a girl who'd been practicing in silence for months, waiting to see what happened next. The teacher did not say much that morning. She handed the paper keyboard back carefully, told the girl to head to class, and watched her go. But something had stayed with her. The image of those fold lines, the worn edges, the careful lettering on every key. She had been teaching for many years. She had never seen anything quite like it. A few days passed. Then the teacher quietly asked around. She spoke to the music coordinator at the school. She mentioned the girl, described what she had seen, explained the paper keyboard. The coordinator listened. She asked a few questions. She said she would think about it. Neither of them said anything to the girl, she continued, as she always had. Library at lunch, paper keyboard on the floor at home in the evenings, fingers moving through scales and simple patterns in complete silence. She had started teaching herself a short melody she had heard on the radio. She had written out the notes in her exercise book, worked out which keys they belonged to, and was slowly moving her fingers through it, one hand at a time. She hummed the tune softly as she practiced, so she had something to measure herself against. She was almost getting it right. She could feel that. Then one afternoon, about 2 weeks after the teacher had found her in the library, something happened that she had not expected. The school had been preparing for a small community evening, a fundraiser for new equipment. The kind of low-key event that happened once or twice a year. Someone had arranged for an old upright piano to be brought in and placed at the side of the school hall, mostly for decoration, to give the evening a bit of warmth. It had arrived the day before, been wheeled into position by 2 caretakers, and then largely forgotten about in the business of setting up tables and hanging banners. She had heard about the piano. Word moves fast in a school. By the end of the day it arrived. Half the children had already gone to peek at it through the hall windows. She had not. She had walked past the hall on her way home, slowed down, looked at the closed doors for a moment, and kept walking. The following afternoon, she stayed behind after the last lesson to collect a book she had left in the classroom. The corridor was mostly empty. Most children had gone home. She walked past the hall again, and this time, the doors were open. Someone had left them open while setting out chairs. There was nobody inside. She stopped at the doorway. The piano was at the far end of the hall, pushed against the wall, a little dusty. It was old and not particularly beautiful. Some of the wooden trim along the top was chipped, but the lid over the keys was up, and from where she stood, she could see the white keys. Real ones, solid and smooth, laid out in the exact same pattern she had been drawing and studying and pressing her fingers against for months. Say, walked in. She crossed the hall slowly, the way you move when you are not sure if you are allowed to be somewhere. She stopped in front of the piano. She looked at the keys up close, a slight yellowing on some of the white ones, the black keys sitting up above them exactly as she had drawn them. She reached out and touched the edge of one white key with the tip of her finger. She did not press it down. She just touched it. It felt nothing like paper. It was smooth and cool and had a weight to it even before she pressed. She could feel, just from touching it, that something would happen if she pushed down. There was a resistance there, a realness that paper had never had. She sat down on the old stool in front of it. She put both hands in her lap for a moment. Then she lifted them and placed them above the keys, the way she had done 1,000 times before on paper. She found middle C without looking. She just knew where it was. She pressed it. The note rang out into the empty hall, clear and round and alive. She sat very still. She had not expected it to feel like that. Not just the sound, though the sound was more than she had imagined, but the feeling of it. The key going down under a finger, the tiny vibration she could feel through her hand, the way the note hung in the air for a moment before it faded. It was like touching something that had only existed in a dream and finding out the dream was real. She played the next note. Then the next. She moved through a simple scale, slowly, one finger at a time, the same way she had practiced it in silence. Every note responded. Every note was real. Then she played the melody she had been learning, the one from the radio, the one she had been humming to herself for weeks. Her right hand picked it out carefully, key by key. It was slow and hesitant in places. She missed one note and had to go back. But the shape of it was there. The tune came out of the piano and floated up into the empty hall, and it was recognizable, and it was something she had taught herself, and it was real. She was crying before she realized she had started. She did not try to stop. She kept playing. She played the melody again, a little more steadily this time. She played it a 3rd time. By the 4th time, she was not crying anymore. She was just playing. She did not hear the footsteps. The teacher had come back to the hall to check on the chair arrangement. She had pushed open the side door quietly and was halfway across the room before she understood what she was hearing. She stopped. She stood behind a row of chairs and listened. The girl at the piano did not know anyone was there. The teacher stood there for a long time, long enough to hear the melody played through several more times, each one a little smoother than the last, long enough to understand what she was actually witnessing, not a child messing around on a piano, but a child who already knew what she was doing, a child who had practiced without an instrument for so long that when she finally sat in front of one, she had simply continued. The next week things began to change. The music coordinator arranged for the old upright piano to stay at the school rather than be returned. It was moved into a small practice room near the music cupboard. The girl was quietly told she could use it during lunch breaks if she wanted. She was there the next day before the coordinator had even unlocked the room. Word also reached a woman who taught piano privately from her home a few streets away. She was told the story secondhand: the paper keyboard, the months of silent practice, the empty hall. She asked to meet the girl. They met one afternoon after school. The woman sat beside her on the piano bench, asked her to play something, and listened. Afterwards, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she told the girl she would teach her every week, and that the lessons would not cost anything. The girl looked at her. She said, simply, "Why?" The woman smiled and said that the girl had already done the hard part. The lessons began the following week. They were unlike anything she had imagined. Having someone sit beside her and explain things. Why the fingers curved, how to move the wrist, how to read a piece of music properly filled in gaps she had not even known were there. She absorbed everything. She asked good questions. She practiced between lessons with an intensity that surprised even the teacher, who had been teaching for a long time and thought she had seen all kinds of students. She had not seen one like this. Months passed, then a year. Then more. She entered a regional competition for young musicians. Her first one, chosen by the teacher who believed she was ready. She performed a short piece she had worked on for weeks. She was nervous, in a way she had not expected, sitting in front of a real audience for the first time. But when her hands touched the keys, the nerves dissolved. Her hands knew what to do. They had always known. She did not win. She placed third. She sat in the audience afterwards and watched the first-place girl receive her certificate, and she felt, not disappointment exactly, but something sharper and more useful. Determination. The same, quiet, patient kind she had always had. The kind that builds paper keyboards on the floor of a small room and practices in silence for months without needing anyone to watch. Years later, she kept every paper keyboard she had ever made. They were stored flat inside a folder, soft and worn from handling. The ink faded on the oldest ones. She took them out sometimes, not out of sentiment exactly, but because they reminded her of something she thought was worth remembering. They reminded her that wanting something is not enough on its own, but it is the beginning. And the beginning is more than most people allow themselves to have. She had been 7 when she heard a piano through an open window on a dusty street and felt something shift inside her chest. She had no money, no teacher, no instrument. What she had was a sheet of paper, a ruler, a black pen, and an understanding, even at 7, that if she could not get to the music, she would have to find a way to bring the music to her. And so she did. She pressed her fingers against silence for long enough that when the sound finally came, she was already ready for it.